Hey, everybody, welcome to another edition of Huddle Up with Howard Richards. I'm Mike Claiborne, and man, we got a lot to talk about. Normally, we have a good guest, but man, I realize that there's so much going on in football on the NFL level, on the college level. I thought it was time for you and me to have a chat. So, where would you like to start?
How about college football playoff?
All right.
Let's
Give me
see where
your
we are.
thoughts on it because, I know everybody's howling about Cincinnati not being in it. And I think there's two things you have to take into account. A, it's better for Cincinnati to be on the outside looking in because one of those four teams that's in it right now is going to lose one more time this year.
Yeah.
And that's your opportunity to move in. Excuse me. Throw in the fact that, you didn't have what I would call an impressive schedule. You played the teams that were on it and you beat the teams that were on it. But I think Cincinnati still has some proving to do to some who really pay attention to the game of college football.
And that's the truth. And the unfortunate thing about teams like Cincinnati is you mentioned it, it's their schedule. And while their record is impressive, um, those that kind of study the stuff always point to the strength of schedule. Well, you can't help that because of the conference that you're in. So the proposals for the proposed, if you will, college football playoff will require conference championships. As I think the automatic qualifiers. I think there may still be some at-large teams, but that way, regardless, if you win your conference championship, you're going to be in the playoff, and I think that cancels the debate about it. Now, people will still talk about it, but again, just by merely winning your championship, it settles that part of it.
That's an interesting discussion in its own right, where no matter what you do in the regular season, and you can run the table, and you stub your toe in the championship game of the conference, I'm not sure if that's always the right approach either. I think I'd be more inclined to award the regular season winner and certainly give strong consideration to the conference champion winner. But I understand that, conference championship games make money for the conference and certainly some TV out there. It probably has a bigger bearing on what's going on. But man, I just think if you're out there beating somebody every Saturday, to let it come down to one Saturday where, something could go wrong, I just don't know if that's fair either. But I really think when this is all said and done, Howard, two things are going to happen. One, we're going to see an expansion. And two, we may see, or I'm of the belief that within 2 to 3 years, the Power Five conferences will secede from the NCAA and form their own setup that will probably be more conducive to two things: better schedules for sure, and I think also we sift through the blood donors. I think that every school should have one blood donor. You should have a regional opponent, and you should also play a team in a comparable conference that gives you credibility too. Those are the three non-conference games I would have, and then of course you have your conference schedule, which is going to be tougher because you're not going to have as many cream puffs as you used to. So I think all those things will come about down the road.
No, I think you're right, and you alluded to something about Power Five conferences. Basically gaining their autonomy from the NCAA. And in fact, I tweeted 3 days ago. If anyone wants to go back and look at this, my Twitter handle is @how_rich, @how_rich. And the article was entitled "The NCAA Releases Draft of Streamlined Constitution That Would Give Power to Schools." I skimmed through the article, but I think it's a good read, and it sets the framework for doing exactly what you mentioned. And I think that ultimately is how the sport is going to evolve. Going back to your point about conference championships, and I think you're spot on by awarding those playoff slots to the overall conference winners, because that's your whole body of work for the season. You should be rewarded for winning it. It's probably more likely to happen in basketball, where you could have a You could have a team with maybe 1 or 2 losses, or even an undefeated team, and you've got some team that's playing 500 or maybe even sub 500 that comes in and upsets someone in basketball. I don't think you'll see that in football, but anything's possible.
You know, the other thing, when you look at this conference and the playoff, if you expand this thing by 2 and certainly by 4, you realize they're going to be playing as many games as they play on Sundays in the NFL. And while we have name and likeness and things of that nature, the compensation has got to be better than what it is right now, man. I mean, I don't know how you figure that out, but I mean, you're asking these kids to not only hold down an opportunity to get an education, but also commit 20 weeks, 25 weeks of your school year to football. I just think there's a lot to be asked, and with all the money coming in, it's just pushing them closer and closer to having to find some way of compensation.
Well, I think so too. If you look at adding additional games, because on the back end you'd have the playoff. You know, people are talking about, it's a holiday season, and you're going into next year. Well, what I see happening is that you back up the schedule, the start of the season, a couple of weeks. The NFL's already started.
Yeah.
You could start right now. College football pretty much starts the end of August, the last weekend in August. You could back it up a couple of weeks. The NFL's already playing preseason games anyway. So I think that could be a way to do it without going deeper into the holiday season and into the new year.
Well, and you know what it also does? It allows you to play the sport within a semester.
Yeah, exactly. With minimal impact,
exactly.
no additional impact to classwork.
Right, exactly. All right. Staying on the college subject, have you ever seen as many assistant coaches get fired in the middle of the season as we're watching now?
It's unprecedented, and I think it really, I think, addresses the pressure that certain institutions are under. Because of how much money's involved, how much more attention is being paid to the sport. I don't know any other reason beyond that. And I think what makes it somewhat easier is that you've got, in addition to your main coaching staff, you've got analysts that essentially have coached or will want to coach and have been groomed to be coaches. Case in point, Al Davis being promoted to the defensive line coach after Mizzou fired Jethro Franklin. So, and this is a guy that played football in the SEC and it has been waiting for this opportunity to elevate himself. So you may not see the end of it. This may be the start of a bigger trend, but it is unusual.
And I think the Coaches Association, and I don't know how strong they are, they might want to sit down and have their own little boilerplate contract to make sure these guys are covered. Because, it's one thing to get fired. It's another thing to get fired in the middle of the season and they say, oh, we'll pay you off. Don't worry about it. But now we're talking about credibility, image, and everything else and being able to find another job. So I think it's something we need to pay closer attention to. It's something that I think you're going to have some coaches take a real step back and wonder, because if they're doing it in college, it's not far from now where the NFL will be doing it as well. Now that we have kind of a green light that it's okay to do it compared to trying to ride out the storm. So I would just say stay tuned to that as well.
Well, and to that point, future contract negotiations, who ends up with more leverage?
Mm-hmm.
Is it the institutions or is it the coaches? Let's just say you've got a coach that's in higher demand, right? And he obviously knows that there's a possibility you can get fired. Well, I'm sure before he inks that contract, he and his agent will want to have certain protections that say, even if it is fired, you got a bigger buyout, or maybe it's dependent upon how many games you coach. There's any number of factors, but I could see that being something that, as an assistant, that you will want to work out in your contract. And if you don't, it's going to be harder. It could conceivably be harder for schools to poach assistant coaches, from other institutions or even those that are quote unquote free agents.
Hey, this is going to be a very interesting offseason as far as coaches moving around. We're going to have at least a half a dozen really good programs that are going to be looking for coaches. And we're going to have at least a half a dozen programs that had hired their new guy, whether he was a coordinator somewhere or whatever, and he's gone into places and it just isn't working. The difference this time around is two of the more highly sought after coaches, and I think there are three. Luke Fickell at Cincinnati. I think James Franklin at Penn State and Mel Tucker at Michigan State. Two happen to be African American. And they're going to be in the conversation for certainly LSU and USC to start with.
No doubt. And you wonder, but just look at Mel Tucker's situation. The thing that makes his situation that much more interesting is that he spent a year. First of all, he came from Georgia, was very successful as a defensive coordinator there. Moved on to Colorado State. Was there for 1 year. Got poached by Michigan State. Now, and Michigan State's it's a big time program in the Big Ten, and for the most part has been a successful program. Under Mike D'Antoni and others before him, and he has brought them certainly back into relevance, especially with this big win over Michigan a couple of weeks ago. They fell on their face last week, but if Tucker leaves after this year, his second season, where does that leave Michigan State? It's like we pay you X amount of dollars, and we, with the hope that you're going to stay here, build a program, build that tradition, so we can compete against, the elite in this conference, Ohio State, Michigan, and now you've kind of left this at the altar again. Then you leave there and you go to a really, really high pressure program at LSU. And if you fail there, then where do you go? Probably back to the NFL, because he's been an NFL coach also.
Well, but throw this into the equation. If they gassed a guy at LSU who won the national championship 2 years ago, anything is open season. I think one of the ways you try and remedy that, you make that buyout so steep.
Yeah.
You plug it in, and I think that'll deter some schools from maybe kicking the tires on you. But it really, man, it spirals out of control with regard to, now that players can transfer. That used to be the big thing. Okay, such and such is jumping this school. I'm stuck here at East Toenail State. You can transfer now, and now guys, like if it's a Mel Tucker or a Franklin, he's going to take 2 or 3 of those guys with him. 2 or 3 of those players with him. So I mean, it's I kind of get a kick out of anarchy from a distance, and anytime it can exist within the NCAA, I really find it quite rewarding. But I think now the NCAA is going to have to step back and really take a long, hard look at what they have and what the future may hold. Let's take a break. We'll come back. This is Howard, Huddle Up with Howard. I'm Mike Claiborne. He's Howard Richards. We'll be back after.
Every day, Ameren, Illinois works to deliver reliable energy throughout the state to on-the-go families, in-the-know grandparents, and busy students. But did you know we also have ways to manage your energy? Paperless billing, outage notifications, pick a due date, auto pay, and so much more. So no matter who you are or how you use your energy, there's an option that's right for you. Learn more at amerenillinois.com/options.
Back with Howard Richards. I'm Mike Claiborne. We call this Huddle Up with Howard here on ClaibsOnline.com. As we wrap up the college situation, let's talk about old Mizzou for a minute. A lot of things have taken place there over the course of this season. Still hope to maybe perhaps become bowl eligible, but they've got some work to do. I don't think anyone would argue that point.
It's basically a new season. It's a 3-game season. You've got 3 games to win 2. And what Mizzou's had to do is adjust its goals. Obviously, you certainly want to be able to compete at the beginning of the season, for that upper tier in the SEC East. That's not an option right now. But the next goal would be to become bowl eligible, because that's revenue for the school. It's an opportunity to extend your season. You get a chance to look during practices for younger players to get more practice time. and maybe rest some of your frontline starters. So that's the benefit of that. Now, you look at the schedule. You've got South Carolina this weekend, Florida, who's reeling, and you finish the season with Arkansas. And that game has become a interesting rivalry because of the presence of Barry Odom as the defensive coordinator at Arkansas, who's everyone knows was the head coach at Mizzou a couple years ago. Now, I look at South Carolina. If you just look at what they did, they pretty much put it to Florida last week. I think the score is 40-17. But Florida is a team with all that talent, and they've had some issues with Dan Mullen seemingly losing that team. Can they hold it together? A lot of people thought Florida, when they were 4-4, they would win out. Then they lose to South Carolina last week, and now there's talking about there's talk of Dan Mullen losing his job.
Well, he already fired some of his assistants last week.
He fired his defensive coordinator and offensive line coach at this late point in the season too. You look at when Mizzou made its move early in the season. The impact was better, I think, from a standpoint of team, but this one just seemed to be more knee-jerk reaction at this point. I don't know. I kind of questioned it. Todd Grantham's got a pretty good track record for the most part as a defense coordinator. So you wonder if there's friction there at the top amongst the coaches, and that really can't bode well for your program. But it comes down for Mizzou's got to you got to win that first game against South Carolina. Then you're at 5 wins. And then you've 2 games, man. If you can get Florida at home, wow, you're sitting pretty. And then you flip a coin going down to Fayetteville to play Arkansas. It's possible. If you look at the way Mizzou started against Georgia, and no one expected this team to go in and beat the Bulldogs, but they did some things.
They covered.
They
covered.
I don't pay attention to that anyway. But they looked. I think they played with more energy, minus the mistakes. Their defense. If you eliminate a couple of things there, that game is much, much closer, at least through the first half.
I got to tell you, and you saw it firsthand, I thought Missouri beat themselves more than Georgia beat them.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah.
I mean, it was the little things that they just couldn't get done. And while you had 2 very young quarterbacks working the game, they were both maybe 1 or 2 plays away from having a sensational day for guys who get thrown into a fire of that nature. I didn't think they were that bad, but I thought that they beat themselves as a team more than Georgia. When you have a team like Georgia, they're supposed to come in and just punish you in every phase of the game, whether it's special teams, defense, offense. I didn't see them do that as much as Missouri with a penalty or a drop pass or a missed blocking assignment. Those are the things that did Missouri more than the talent of Georgia. Maybe they felt the pressure of what Georgia was all about, but Georgia didn't physically dominate Missouri like I think many of us thought could happen.
Exactly. Well, it's the things that you mentioned to self-destruct. You've got penalties. You allow Georgia to block a punt, and I mean that basically. I looked at the replay immediately, and I can tell you exactly what happened on the. This Australian ruse type punter, Grant McInnes, the wedge in front of him was moving to the right. Mm-hmm. All the pressure, 2 guys came from the backside. The guy that was farthest to the left in the wedge only looked to his right. Had he looked back to see what was coming from the backside, he possibly just chips that guy and that punt is in the block.
Yeah.
What? That's when I talk about fundamental. When I talk about fundamentals, those are the things with younger players that they've got to be able to focus on and study all the nuances of this game. And that's where you talk about teams that are middling and teams that are good, to elite.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And you use the word fundamental. And man, there are too many times this season that I saw these guys make fundamental mistakes. Now, is that coaching? Is that where they came from? Is it where they were taught this way beforehand? But man, I mean, the basic rules of football just don't seem to be accentuated as much as they need to be in order to compete on Saturdays and of all conferences, the SEC. So they've got to figure that out.
But I also, Mike, let me just add one more thing to that. And everyone wants to put it on scheme and coaching, and it's not always that. As a player, as an individual, you have to take responsibility. There was there was I'm just going to backtrack a little bit. We're talking about, just look at the Missouri team, for example. Everyone on social media, the so-called Monday morning quarterbacks, the experts, think it's all about scheme. There's a quote, and I don't have it up in front of me, but I'm paraphrasing from what Kirby Smart said. So we evaluate our players. We know exactly what we need as players, on our team. He goes, it is not about scheme. The success of your team, week in, week out, year in, year out, comes down to one thing: talent and how the players execute. So I want to dispel all that stuff about, what Steve Wilkes is running as a scheme. You've got to have talented players to execute what schemes are called on defense and what plays are called on offense.
I'm glad you brought that up, because for those second guessers, wouldn't know a scheme if they got tackled by one.
That's true.
I mean, football is a game that it's more than catching, throwing, and run the football. There are a lot of other things that go into it. And football can be complicated to those who want to make it that way. But I think the people who want to use those terms about scheme and technique and things, I really wonder how much they understand how the game is coached and how it's played, especially in this era, because the game has changed dramatically as far as how it's played. And obviously it's being taught differently as well, because you got a different type of athlete. But when it's all said and done, the fundamentals don't disappear. You still have to maintain them, and they have to get some more guys who actually understand that element before they go any further. Speaking of going any further, stand by for coming back.
The 2021 Acura TLX is the top-selling luxury sedan in St. Louis, and St. Louis Acura has an unbeatable selection. The TLX has the highest safety rating, and right now you can get $2,500 in loyalty conquest offers with 0% financing for up to 36 months. We offer free pickup and delivery, and we'll also buy your used vehicle, even if you don't buy from us. St. Louis Acura, committed to becoming better than ever for you.
We continue with Howard Richards. He's Howard. I'm Mike, and let's talk a little bit about the NFL. And it seems like it's always a quarterback issue. And this year, and we can go back to training camp with Cam Newton and his situation with New England, to now Aaron Rodgers and his faux pas of last week. Give me your thoughts on what you heard from Aaron Rodgers. We'll start with that.
Aaron Rodgers is a leader in this league, and he, has been for some time. For him to make misleading statements, I think it's just very dangerous. For a guy that really, focuses and preaches team, I think it's very selfish, and not just Rodgers, but I think a lot of guys that have chosen, to not get the coronavirus vaccine. I just think if you just look at, regardless of what your profession is, if you just look at the science involved in this and what the vaccination does with regard to protections, not just for yourself, but those people around you, especially those that are vulnerable, susceptible, to underlying conditions, those with pre-existing immunocompromised situations with them. I think that is one thing that people that are choosing to do this aren't looking beyond themselves, whether it's a family member or a close friend or a teammate. You're putting yourself at risk and others at risk by choosing not to do this. But to say, when he's questioned, about being vaccinated, he used the word immunized. And he's doing that to deflect, to say, well, I'm immunized, but I'm not going to tell you what I'm immunized with, Yeah. Well, just come out and say, I'm not, and I'm sure if you just come out and say it then, yeah, he's going to get some heat for not doing it. But down the road, it's going to be worse, because now you've chosen to be deceptive, and that's never good. And now I think he wants to sort of backtrack a little bit. But I think when you're a leader in this game, I think your impact goes far beyond the National Football League. there are people that don't play the sport that watch, from all walks of life, from all different types of professions. And you as a leader, if you're doing this, you're going to get others. You're going to, indirectly encourage others to do the right thing. And the sooner those that are unvaccinated get vaccinated, the faster this country can get through this thing. And that's essentially, how I look at this. It's unfortunate that you have those choice few that refuse to do it and take a more selfish standpoint. Look, I understand everyone has a right to do it or not, but when you're in a situation like that, as a public figure, I think you sort of owe it to the public to, do the right thing. Do the things that, I think from a public interest or going to, show leadership, because your platform is like no other. Maybe in some cases, even more influential than the president of the United States.
Well, that depends on what he did on Sunday.
True.
Monday he could be somebody else. But I agree with your point. I think I'd add to the fact that Aaron Rodgers has always had his moments as far as communicating. You call him a leader, there's some that'll tell you, he barely knows the players on his team. He's a different cat. He did mislead people. There's no question about that. And now he's trying to soften it. Like, I'd like to move on from it. Well, no, it's not that easy, because you had the chance to have the potential to, expose other people. The Packers are as culpable as well. They knew he wasn't vaccinated, but yet and still they let him talk openly in media sessions. And at what point does Joe Rogan become the medical advisor for the stars? I mean, Joe Rogan, he does a podcast. Okay. He has no medical background, to the point where he doubted the whole virus thing. And then he ended up getting it. So, it had a bad smell to it all the way around. And I don't think it's going to go away that quickly. But I think that, we got to step back and there needs to be more accountability. We see it in the NBA where they just told Kyrie Irving, you stay where you're at.
We'll take a seat.
And we'll figure this out, because we can show you that, we may not be as good without you, but you know what? This is what teams are all about. And everybody's got their own reason for not doing it, and that's all good. But I think what comes with that is whatever that career that you partake in, there may be some parameters set that require you to do it. And we've seen it in the NFL and the NBA. Then if you don't like it, then A, you don't get paid, and B, you can stay home, because the game's going to go on without you.
Yeah, no doubt.
You shouldn't worry about that. All right, I want to stay on the subject of quarterbacks. Cam Newton is back with his first team, that'd be at the Carolina Panthers. And they've had all kind of quarterback issues there. Darnold has been hurt. Their other guy hasn't been very effective. It doesn't help them. Christian McCaffrey hasn't been available to them as much as they need him to. But Cam Newton going back to Carolina, give me your thoughts on that.
I think it benefits Cam. He's in a familiar place. He was well-liked in Carolina. Banished, of course, when Matt Rule came in and took over, and Cam went packing. Had reasonable success in New England, but when New England drafted Mac Jones, Cam became expendable. What may benefit Cam, he's been off for 8 weeks plus. He's had time to get healthy. And you would like to think that he's been working out and being prepared for this opportunity. Cam, as colorful as he is, I think the guy still has ability, especially when he's healthy. And I think he's still got more football left in the tank. And maybe Carolina is the right spot for him, given, again, he knows it. He's been there. There's still guys on the team that he's familiar with. And it might just be the medicine that the Panthers need, to play much, much better in the second half of their season while their starting quarterback gets healthy.
Well, they need more than a little medicine. They might need a whole pharmacy, which brings me to this question. Either you're really good, not great, or you're really, really bad. There are very few middle ground teams that are playing this year as we approach the 9th game of the year. Man, there's a lot of teams under 500. They don't look like there's any relief in sight. And then you have other teams that are over 500, but I don't know if you put all your eggs in their basket. I mean, it's kind of one of those years where there's no dominant team, but there's a whole lot of bad teams, and they don't show any indication that they're going to get better anytime soon.
And look at the teams that had the best record going into Week 8 last week.
Mm-hmm.
The Rams, the Cowboys, teams that just didn't play well at all for whatever reason. It was almost like playing on Friday the 13th last week for a lot of these teams. There were the things that we saw on the field just were inexplicable. But that's the thing. You live, you flush it, you get back out there, you start the second season. And this is really where I think the rubber meets the road. The teams that are going to start to separate, now's the time in the second half of the season for them to do so. Looking at Dallas, obviously that's the team I'm most familiar with. They get some pieces back. I think Michael Gallup should be back in the fold. He helps them at the receiver position. Another weapon for Dak Prescott, who may have been off by missing a week against Minnesota. But I think they lose Randy Gregory to a similar injury, the calf injury that Dak Prescott had. But you got to think that DeMarcus Lawrence will be on his way back to soon. So defensively, that's where they really need the most help. That's what's going to carry them, I think, the rest of the year. Offensively, I don't worry about them even, in spite of last week's bad game. But it's the defense that if the Cowboys are going to challenge for any kind of championship, you'd like to say they have the division wrapped up. But if you're challenging for an NFC championship, that defense has to play more consistently. They've got to play better throughout the second half of the season.
Let's come back with some final thoughts as we huddle up with Howard after we take this time out.
The only thing faster than this supersonic golf cart are the closing times at thehomeloanexpert.com. Mortgage rates on the twos, and we have a 21-day closing guarantee. Apply online today at thehomeloanexpert.com.
Final segment with Howard Richards. All right, let's wrap it up, man. Final thoughts on where you look forward to seeing this upcoming week on the college field and also in the NFL.
I think in college, just look at the SEC. Who is going to make that statement? The last 3 weeks of the season. What's going to happen with Alabama? I think, if Alabama, you think they're going to probably run the table. They'll end up in the championship game with Georgia, and that'll be a dogfight because obviously Alabama. The thing about Alabama, when they lose a game, even though they didn't necessarily play well the week before, it's just something that I think motivates that team under Nick Saban that much more. And I think it makes them that much more dangerous, even though their defense isn't playing certainly at the level that Georgia's defense is, but I would never bet against Nick Saban. I'm just saying, I just never would.
Especially if you on his coaching staff, because none of his ex-coaches have ever had a chance to beat him. So that bodes well.
Jimbo Fisher this year.
That's right.
And Jimbo finally got it. And then I think just across the Power Five, who's going to separate and how is the college football playoff going to, shape up over the next couple of weeks? What's Ohio State going to do? The Cincinnati, will they still be on the outside looking in? And then you've got, the Michigan States and what happens here? I just don't know. But listen, this college season, we say that every year, but the last 3 weeks are really going to be, I think, worth watching because what we see today isn't necessarily the way it's going to end up once that the final playoff field is set.
I am not the biggest proponent of the Heisman Trophy. I kind of think it's kind of a fraud as far as its definition of what that player should look like. But I know it's a recognizable award in college football. Do you have any insight on who you think is going to win this thing, or is it still too early to tell?
I think it's too early to tell, but just look at that. There's a defensive player at Georgia that has gotten a lot of publicity and he's got some momentum, and that's Jordan Davis. The guy is a one-man wrecking crew, and just think he doesn't even play every down. Yeah. If he plays every down, man, it would be. I think he may even run away with it, but it has become more of an offensive award. So you elevate that other award that really I think rewards a defensive player, whether it's the Butkus Award or I can't even remember what it is that elevates that to sort of be on par with the Heisman. Because I don't think that the Heisman is ever going to change. It's going to be an offensive heavy award, and but listen, there's no one that stands out right now.
That's my point. I don't think anybody jumps out at you and said, "Man, he's dominating or he's leading his team." I don't see that guy. And as you look at those top 4 teams, who's the best offensive player on those teams? Those teams all have very good defenses. I tell you, guy, though, I kind of like, he won't win it. That guy that quarterbacks at Alabama, he checks a lot of boxes for me. Bryce Young. He checks a lot of boxes, man. Again, I don't think he'll win it. And I think it's hard for quarterbacks from schools like Alabama to win it. But, man, I really like where that guy's future's headed.
I do too, and he's a freshman. Well, he's a sophomore, but he got some spot playing as a freshman last year. But this year, I think he's exceeded a lot of expectations for being a a full-time starter. How about Matt Corral at Ole Miss? I think he may have taken a step back last week.
Yeah,
but his body of work for the rest of the season, you can't count him out either. But it becomes subjective, who the voters are, because that they all have their favorites, and their mindset when it comes to voting isn't necessarily, I think, the best methodology for selecting the ultimate winner.
I could not agree with you more. All right, we're out of time for today, ladies and gentlemen. He's Howard Richards. I'm Mike Claiborne. We thank you for watching and listening, and we'll be back next week with another exciting episode of Huddle Up with Howard here on Claves Online.